Do 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 do. Extras.
When Seven was lost in the collapsing portal in Ginneron, Draven's connection was lost, just as you would expect when a homunculus or other familiar dies. That doesn't necessarily mean there's no hope, but it did necessitate some moving on. Therefore, the next time they were in Corso's Chasm, Draven used the Item Familiar feat from Unearthed Arcana to turn the magical Itaran Tome, Avoiding Overreaction, into a semi-sapient familiar, which he named 8. There's some weird ability item familiars have to increase XP or something. We're ignoring that. But the bright orange and yellow book became bonded to Draven, having 360-degree senses of its own, and some other skill-enhancing abilities, in addition to the offhand item bonuses it already granted. With my permission, he made a special leather carrying harness for the book, so it would hang from his waist and have more of its surface covered up, making it less gaudy and a little more compatible with moving stealthily. However, the pouch still had about a 5-inch square near the top where the tome was exposed, allowing him to rest his hand there for the reassurance and knowledge that it gave. And we ruled that he needs a hand free to take advantage of its bonuses. Effectively, for game rules purposes, it's still treated just as a shield, but whether it's in use or unequipped, it now hangs from his belt. In addition to the 3 paths discussed in TDDC, players contemplated at least one other approach to getting to Vistria, flying the entire way. If they pooled their cash using DeCorso's Advance as well, they could shorten their travel time and avoid many dangers, orcs, diluvians, whatever. Draven was worried about what might attack them in the air. They would be heading away from the griffins of the Dwarven lands, and if any dragons even remain on the continent, they are exceptionally rare or keep themselves well hidden nowadays. However, the principles of narrative causality suggest that any mode of travel short of teleportation would result in some kind of encounter, and the idea of being shot down from high altitude over hostile territory concerned him, especially since their ability to fight would be limited by the small space on a flying carpet. That's not to say Draven was entirely against it. The real reason they didn't do it was that a flying carpet or similar conveyance of sufficient size would have taken all of their money, even at the discounted rate of Draven crafting it himself, and none of them were too keen to invest everything in an item which wouldn't help them in combat. On the other hand, as they began thinking of the future, little ones started envisioning some of the crazy things they could try and do, and soon everybody was imagining using rules from the Stronghold Builder's Guidebook to create a small, literal flying fortress, which they could eventually use to transport an elite force in the Grand Crusade to destroy the Diluvian capital in the Balian archipelago. Little One still dreams of recruiting some of the deadly orcs, or training soldiers with his warblade techniques, or trolls. Anything like that was a long way off, though. Not only would it take hundreds of thousands of gold to produce even a minimal flying fortress, but they were all aware that a lot more experience would be needed before they could even think about attacking the core of the massive evil empire. And before that, Draven would want to liberate his ancestors' homeland of Verandi, and Black would want to be right by his side. Angel isn't as picky about where they go, as long as she gets a chance to make the fishmen pay for what happened to the master who trained her. In terms of introducing the players to their world, I have a really bad habit. You see, I have so many ideas, and I've thought about them so much that I put the cart ahead of the horse a bit. I keep demonstrating the exception before the rule. One of the first drow they encounter, and definitely the most memorable one by far, is Cavinteria, one of the rare giant drow, the ones who exhibit the recessive genes for the 7-foot wood elf build. The first live Kuatoa encountered during gameplay, Voldo, is a member of the only house made up of large-sized mutant KTs. Also, the second was Baob, who speaks common with a weird accent that is presumably quite uncommon since they've spoken to or been shouted at by like a dozen KTs from both sides of the Civil War, none of whom talk that way. While exceptions like that are awesome, It's really bad design for it to happen all the time without foreshadowing. If I was thinking, I'd have done the whole adventure without any oversized drow before introducing one, so they would have a better feel for what drow are like in the world. And same thing, it would be better designed to have them run into Kuatoa a couple times before unleashing a so-called fish ogre from House Babago. Even the name House Babago and Baob, for that matter. Those names are unusual. Diluvians consider it improper, borderline blasphemous to begin a proper name with B, unless it is something directly related to their god, Blibal, or the worship of her. This has led some of the Illud to use B names as a deliberate insult, but most still observe the taboo because they know Blibal is a real goddess, and many of them figure she's pissed off enough already. And even House Babago, they only took that name when the Civil War began. Insulting people is right up their alley. Warforged Daggerface is a weird exception in some ways, but in others, he's really not. Sure, the cosmetic artificing he's had done on his face makes him look instantly distinct from other members of his manufactured race, but he's a great example of the fact that the Warforged who are found, woken from suspended animation, can really be and do whatever they want once they get over that initial hump, once they realize that they don't belong to anyone. They're their own masters. Nevertheless, I don't think the party had explicitly run into any Warforged moving around in society. They aren't common at all, but they're noticeable enough that I should have pointed them out here and there. They had seen a couple of Dragonborn, and their survivors are so rare that the New Forged, as some call them, Warforged with little or no memory from Itaran times, are actually more numerous than the freeborn refugees. Ancient Warforged, those who have remained conscious and survived far beyond the limitations of their design, like GE7, are virtually unknown, though. There are even more examples of this problem I have, but this Extras is for episode 13, and I'm not allowed to skip ahead that far. When the heroes started waking up, bound and manacled together, Black felt some of the thug minions pawing at his armor. But it didn't have any straps or even latches like ordinary armor, and they couldn't find any way to remove it. Not without killing him, anyway. Draven had been taken down by multiple knife wounds, compounded by a little falling damage. The gang had healed enough of his injuries to staunch the bleeding, but he woke up to find himself bruised, including bruises on his head and arms which were not consistent with the fall. When he realized this, he was like, "What the hell?" But the mage told him, "Yeah, well, one of the guys tried to take some book from you, and you, freaked out all over him. You were pretty sure you were unconscious. It was messed up." Given that they'd been forced to leave the book, 8, in its carrying strap, Draven, the player anyway, was actually pretty happy with this explanation. I think I covered in pretty good detail in the video what I had planned for the Daggerface encounter, or what went horribly wrong, and what I think my main errors were. Part of the whole reason Daggerface existed was really the idea that you rarely have multiple people in a single work of fiction with the same name. It's what TV Tropes calls the one Steve limit. And it would be especially funny and unexpected with a bizarre name like Daggerface. That's why, right from early on, the scarred, deranged dwarf managed to take on the name Daggerface instead of something more obvious like Scarface. I basically made him just to spring some kind of literal Daggerface on them later. I'm that twisted. As far as his mage, Baxter, aka BX, is concerned, obviously he's inspired greatly by a certain character from Venture Brothers. I say inspired because he's not the same character. He's more what TV Tropes would call an XP, an homage. While his appearance and awesome voice are definitely pulled from that show, his character, his personality, his abilities would be surprisingly different if you had more time to get to know him. Well, other than a tendency to complain, but even then, BX sees himself as on the same level as his boss, creating a very different dynamic than that certain Venture Brothers character. Behold my mighty orb! Little One's player did post a response, or a clarification comment on TDDC number 13. Although I portrayed what actually happened very well, he felt some of my characterizations of why Little One acted the way he did and why he hated Daggerface were, let's say, a little off base. If I can try again, based on his comment, Little One does hate to lose. I mean, most people do. But it was more than that. His mother was a bronze dragon. She raised him alone, trained him to fight, and to follow a code of honor. Now, we're not talking about a rigid paladin-like code, but still a warrior's code. The fact that Warforged Daggerface was fighting for nothing but money, not to save or protect people, not to avenge a wrong, not even to test his strength, that the people he fought were not his enemies. He didn't care who it was, just that he got paid, and that really rubbed the Orc Slayer the wrong way. The machine's tactics and special abilities were irritating and somewhat overpowered, but after the fact, Little One wouldn't hold a grudge over intelligent fighting. He doesn't really care about that particular kind of honor. When lives are on the line, you do what you can to win. But the other element was that not only was he beaten by this unprincipled, obnoxious lout, but when Little One refused to concede defeat, the bladed bastard refused to grant him a warrior's death. He had no desire to die, as the player mentioned in his comment. Against an honorable opponent, one he respected, things could be different. I mean, if he'd lost to Marp the Orc and had lived, he would have accepted giving him a tribute, like the dwarf giving up his adamantine hammer in the NPC duel that I had planned, but which never actually happened. But conversely, Little One would accept the surrender of most enemies. Maybe not cold-blooded murderers, and certainly not horribly evil things like undead, but if they would concede defeat, he would generally accept most enemies' surrender. But if they don't surrender, then he would give them a warrior's death, and he expects the same in return. Being beaten by an opponent with no principles, then subjected to such indignities, such an insult, it was intolerable. Finally, if they stole from him, it wasn't like losing something in a contest. He was already bound, beaten down, and defenseless. It's possible something snapped in that moment, awakening some draconic instinct. The pride, the wrath, maybe a hint of greed. Because you do not steal from a dragon's hoard. Not while the dragon lives. Hopefully that's a little better, a little more nuanced expression of what happened from Little One's point of view. In any case, he really hates Warforged Daggerface. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already, and let me know if you have any questions about Tales from My D&D campaign, about the game setting, or about being a game master in general. I'm not really an expert, but I'll see what I can do.